What happens when passion meets pricing and burnout tries to sneak in between? Well, in this episode of the Web Remedy podcast, we talk with the brilliant Dr. Henry C. McKoy for a real, no-fluff conversation about money mindset, pricing your worth, and staying sane while building your business. We talk about practical pricing strategies, the emotional cost of burnout, and how to reframe sales as service. It's equal parts mindset shift and money talk with a dose of entrepreneurial therapy. So grab your favorite beverage and get ready for a conversation that will help you charge what you're worth, protect your energy, and grow your business with confidence. Welcome, listeners, to another episode of the Web Remedy podcast. I'm Rennie Orr, podcast producer, your co-host, and co-founder of Web Squared.
And I'm Stephanie Terry, the podcast host and the other co-founder of Web Squared. And we are so excited today because we are being joined by Dr. Henry C. McKoy Jr., who is a nationally recognized leader in energy policy, finance, and economic development. Welcome, Dr. McKoy. How are you?
I'm well. I'm so happy to be here, and I thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here and join this important conversation.
Today's conversation is one we hope will resonate with almost every entrepreneur. We talk about value, we talk about money, we talk about emotions and burnout, and just how we can build businesses that honor both purpose and profit. And Dr. Henry, is that what we call you?
You call me, look, Henry is just fine. I will answer to that. So I'm just happy to be here.
Listen. Okay. Dr. Henry, I never discount that doctor. I know it was a whole lot of
that is
blood,
true.
Sweat, and tears.
Well, look, I will not push back on that. I tell you what, it's just, many hours.
Absolutely. So, but this conversation about money and value and how we price our products and services is so important. And that's one of the reasons why we're so happy to have you here, because you know a whole lot about entrepreneurship. So can you just share with our listeners some of your journey about how you came to understand entrepreneurship and some of the places and areas that you worked during your life?
Yeah, happy to do so again, and really happy to be here in this important conversation. I mentioned Henry McKoy. I'm North Carolina born and raised, born in Fayetteville. So, I'm a home state guy, but I currently serve as president and CEO of the Carolina Community Impact Fund. We're a community development financial institution, a CDFI for those who know that works across the Carolinas, both North Carolina and South Carolina, to really expand access to capital. We do housing counseling, economic opportunity, with a particular focus on underserved entrepreneurs, underserved communities. Before I had this role, I had the real honor of serving the country. I was a appointee of President Joseph Biden. I actually had two appointments under President Biden in the U.S. Department of Energy. I focused on national clean energy deployment, innovation, equity, investment, economic development, workforce development. Prior to that, I spent early part of my career, about 15 years or so, in banking and finance. I was an executive with banks that ultimately, for those who've been around long enough, it started out as Central Carolina Bank, ultimately grew up to be SunTrust and then Truist. And so I got a chance to oversee a couple of multi-billion-dollar operations, grow a couple of those. And, really it served as a strong foundation for my passion for investing in entrepreneurs and others. I've also been an entrepreneur myself. And so I know that entrepreneurship is not easy. So I certainly can appreciate the journey that everyone goes to down that path. Beyond that, I've also had the privilege of being in the education space. I've served as a teacher and mentor for students at UNC Chapel Hill, Duke University, and where I spent the majority of my career in teaching was North Carolina Central University School of Business, where I led the entrepreneurship program as director of entrepreneurship. But regardless of where I've been and what I've done, my focus has always been on really trying to build systems that create equitable economic growth. And how do we bring opportunity, innovation in ways that can reach everybody? And so, that's why I'm really excited about this conversation today. It's not just about business, it's about values, about sustainability, how entrepreneurs can honor their worth, while building something that really does truly lasts and really does truly matter.
That's wonderful. And you said North Carolina Central. I have warm memories of North Carolina Central School of Business way back in the day. I mean, I'm not going to say the year, but I had a catering company, and this was the very beginning stages of my vegan bakery. North Carolina Central, one of their entrepreneurial classes, took on my business and wrote my first business plan, like with
Really?
me.
Oh,
Yeah,
wow.
and I was so proud of that business plan. I mean, I used to carry it around with me when I'm that it felt so good to have that plan. So I have really warm memories about the good work that happened in CCU.
Well, we love I love those kind of stories. One thing about NCCU is that there's a really strong focus on community and community-based entrepreneurs, and this idea of how can we work with individuals who really are passionate about bringing their ideas to life. And so I know I had a chance to teach many classes where we had the opportunity to work with entrepreneurs like you who just kind of needed to get their idea onto paper and move forward. So glad to hear that story.
Well, that leads me to talk about one of the questions we wanted to talk about today. Stephanie, I would imagine as a beginning entrepreneur, I wonder if you had any of those questions like we get from a lot of our entrepreneurs about pricing your products and your services when you were writing your business plan.
Yeah, so I can tell you the way that I approached pricing way back in the day was completely different the way I think about it now. And it's so funny because in our incubator, when we're coaching web entrepreneurs, I get to see me in different stages. The way that I approached pricing was like literally pulling numbers out of the air sometimes, thinking that I would approach it. How much do I think someone would want to pay for this? And I had muffins, and I would be like, would I buy a $5 muffin? No, but would I buy a $2.50 muffin? Yeah, I may buy that. And then I would try to I would call it sweat equity. And I would say, well, I'm gonna sell it for this amount. And it was just completely divorced from a strategy. It was divorced from the cost of goods. I didn't have an understanding about formulas. I knew I was making an incredible product because I kept getting repeat customers and people were telling other people, but it took a while. It took some years. It actually took that North Carolina Central business class to show me just some foundational analysis around pricing and product, and always work between a 20 and 30% cost of goods. And the one thing that I never did for a long time was include my labor, which is huge. So that's, friends, I'm not there now. I'm just sharing very transparently how my thinking was and my approach to pricing when I was in my 20s, starting out to be an entrepreneur. But I'm curious to hear from you, Dr. Henry, what your experiences has been with working with entrepreneurs around pricing.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think you hit a lot of the topics, and I'd say one thing. I think it's so important for entrepreneurs and those who are getting into business to listen to podcasts like this, or to think about going to take a class or to work with a business school, business class around your idea. Pricing, interesting enough, is one of the hardest things that you have to deal with as an entrepreneur because of the exact thing you said. I mean, it's a competitive marketplace, and so one of the things that you have to certainly take into account are all these different inputs that go into bringing your product to life. Now, certainly being an advisor, consultant type of entrepreneur and trying to price that is going to be a little bit different than, selling a muffin, as you said. And you hit all of the points. You always got to think about, what does it really cost you? I love the idea that you started eventually thinking about the price of goods. So many students I had in my courses who thought about, things like baking cakes or doing goods like that, didn't really think about the idea that, hey, I had to go out and buy some kind of input, right? I had to go buy the flours, the sugar, and all those kind of things. So when you're thinking about it from that standpoint, yeah, you got to think about the actual cost of what you had to put into the product, right? Because you want to recover that cost. You then also do have to think about, what is the cost of transporting that someplace, right? Let's say you're going and you're setting up at a fair or something, or what is the cost of gas? I mean, those are real costs and things of that nature. Or let's say you're shipping something or whatever the case. I mean, you got to take all those costs into effect as well. But you also have to take your labor into cost. One thing I would tell students to think about is to think about, what would be your salary if it could be ideal, right? And think about, okay, on a yearly basis, I would make this amount, and then break it up basically by the hour. I mean, and that you start to understand what your hourly rate is, and you can input that into as well. And so in some ways, I mean, it's both an art and a science, because you hit a number of things that are important. You are in a competitive landscape, and people, if they don't know your product, may not be willing to pay, top dollar for it compared to somebody else. And so, I mean, you do have to understand the landscape. You also, think about the idea of, having a introductory price sometimes that you raise over time. But either way, I mean, you should always be very conscious, even if and this is, I think, really important, even if you're not charging the full cost of what it takes to make something, you should know what it costs to make it, right? So you should know that if I'm losing $1 for every muffin I'm selling, I'm losing $1. You may take that as being like the cost of getting into the marketplace or whatever, which again, it can be fine, but it's just important to really understand the cost of something, because I've seen so many entrepreneurs who are actually losing money with every product they sell, and they can't understand why they can't kind of get their head above water. So I think, again, it is part science, but at the end of the day, just understand the cost of everything that goes into making your good or service. And I would tell students to really list it out, right? I mean, list out every part of that ingredient and put a price to it. And that'll give you some sense of what it does cost you to deliver this item.
I would totally agree. And, and sometimes when you start off small and you're just getting your foot in the door or just reaching your market, it's okay to change your pricing. It's okay to have an introductory price, learn about your market. Maybe you're developing relationships with vendors, and you're testing to see if you could like substitute, for example, blueberries, are you buying fresh blueberries? Are you buying frozen? Will it impact the quality of your final product? So it's okay to play around. That's the kind of art piece of it, like you shared.
Yeah, and also, you think about it, I mean, there are a number of products. We may not often know this personally, but there's sometimes that companies essentially offer an introductory type of item at a loss of them, so they can get you to kind of more expensive items, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, that's just the reality of what it is. I mean, and you see people you walk around the store, they're giving out free samples of XYZ, or something like, I mean, when you go to technology, something like emails, right? I mean, those things you don't pay for, but if you end up clicking on those buttons and things like that for advertising and things like that, that money goes to the company. So, I mean, there is sometimes a strategy around, hey, I'm gonna have this. It's gonna cost me more to kind of sell this to you than what I pay for it. But guess what? The version 2 of this, the next item up, if they like this so much, then hey, maybe I will pay $5 for that muffin.
Right.
From your perspective as an economist and an entrepreneur, are there any long-term costs to an entrepreneur if they're consistently undervaluing their prices?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple of costs when you think about it in real terms. I think one of them, from a basic economic standpoint, is the possibility of going out of business, right? If you are consistently selling your product for cheaper than what you have to pay for it, then somebody has to make up that cost. That's a problem. So from a standpoint of long term, you can't consistently over time be selling your product for cheaper than it's worth. I think if you think about something like maybe being a consultant or advisor, and you are charging people less than what your time really is worth, there's a couple things that's happening, right? I mean, you trying to figure out a way to support your lifestyle or some roof over your head and food on the table. And over time, I mean, again, that could have a serious impact if you're underpricing on your ability to actually do those things. And it also, I mean, it can have a psychological impact as well. If you consistently undervalue your product and service, that even as you become better at what you do, more expert at what you do, then you may have sometimes where you start thinking, well, I just can't raise this price. Or maybe you start thinking that you're not worth raising the price. And so I think it is incredibly important. And that's why there's the sentiment about people knowing your worth, because if you don't know your own worth, then sometimes it's very hard for other people to know your worth. I mean, every once in a while you meet an incredible person who may say, well, you know what? You should be charging me more for that than you are, and those are the people you hope you come across in life. But certainly, again, if you don't value your own skills, your own knowledge, your own output to a certain extent, and then over time, it can have an incredible psychological impact on your own self-worth.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I would also add that, you can attach a low value in terms of quality to your brand. Because there's sometimes you're not, people are expecting to pay a bit more for a quality product. And if you consistently over time devalue your product or services, then that becomes associated with you.
Yeah, and that's actually a great example of, there's things where, you really are, people associate the cost with the value of it, right? I mean, it may be the exact same thing, and and they just have a different tag on it. I mean, we see this all the time in all kind of products that they just have a higher price, and people associate that with quality. That if you have a lower price, they don't. So I mean, I think that's an incredible example, because if you are trying to build a brand in the marketplace, and what people know you to be is a low cost brand, depending on what you're trying to basically build out, it could have some real negative impacts to you if you ever feel like you want to kind of move up in terms of saying, hey, you know what, I don't want to be known as simply associated with being the low cost option, but I want to be known as being the best option.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think about Hellman's mayonnaise, and you're going to pay top dollar for that.
Oh yeah.
You're gonna pay top dollar, and then you look at well, some people like Dukes, but and let me not get into brands on this podcast.
Send them a check. Tell them you advertise. Tell them send you a check.
I think we have to say Hellman's did not sponsor this podcast.
No.
Yeah, right.
Well, I mean, a lot of the things that you guys were talking about comes around the idea of identity, like who you are as a brand, how you see yourself. I'm just thinking about some of the people starting out as entrepreneurs. They have this great idea, they have this great product, but they don't realize that the journey of entrepreneurship is not always easy. You're wearing so many hats, and you're doing it yourself. You're doing all the business registration, you're setting up those legal structures, you're trying to figure out the pricing, you have to do the marketing. You're managing all your operations. And I think it's just going to be a lot. I think maybe we could talk a little bit about identity and burnout, like people getting to a point where like, well, this is too much. Maybe I'll just go get a real job. If somebody gives me a paycheck. What advice would you guys give to entrepreneurs who are beginning to feel the weight and possible burnout of their endeavor?
Well, I would say, I mean, it's a real thing. You just mentioned all of the things that entrepreneurs have to do to be entrepreneurs. But the entrepreneurs also have to live life, right? So, I mean, there's all these other things that they have to deal with. I'll give you a personal example that's relevant to me. When I first started my business back in, I guess it would have been the early 2000s, and, I needed to be a lot of places at a lot of time. I need to go to chamber meetings. I needed to be in rooms where people could meet me and things of that nature. But I also, was a father and a husband and all those kind of things. And I had to, I remember at one period of time, I would watch as my grass become overgrown. And I had this certain kind of guilt that I had because I had my son who was really small at the time. And I didn't necessarily want him to see me farming out, cutting grass to somebody else, right? Because I knew that in a few years I'd be having him cut grass. But I also realized that, I can't do everything. I mean, at the end of the day, I have to figure out those things. So I did, hire somebody to cut the grass for me because I needed to be out there trying to build my business. And I think you have to be, realistic about the toll that it can have on you to have to be everything and do everything. So I always say, you hear about the stories when people say, pay yourself first. It's the same way, I think, in terms of your physical and your emotional well-being. To take time, sometimes when you can, to separate yourself from things, right? I mean, whether that be go take a walk or, watch something, that you love on TV that's disassociated with the business. But, you have to really just be very conscious that, again, you can't always be everything to everybody, and you have to learn how to not overwhelm yourself. I say that understanding, as you said, that entrepreneurship really is a full-time job when you're trying to build a business. If I don't do this, then, I mean, there's nobody else that's doing it. It's not, as you say, it's not where you are getting a paycheck from somebody where, you show up from 8 to 5 and take an hour lunch and you're off on weekends and all these kind of things. I mean, it's around the clock. So you have to create that balance between this idea of building a business, but also taking care of yourself.
I can share a little bit about my journey as an entrepreneur where I had a lot of ambition, lots of ambition, but not necessarily the capacity to meet all the opportunities that would come my way, which I called opportunities. I'll share one. I've got a contract to deliver bread to a supermarket and for their grand opening, and they wanted like 300 loaves. And, I didn't have the equipment. But I got it done, but I was not able to keep it going because I kind of I just didn't have the operations to sustain that. And so when I think back on all the times that I've felt burnout, if I could speak to myself back then, I think the advice would be to slow down and really look at how helpful building systems could be if you incorporate systems into your operations, especially now with all of the, technology that's available to us. I remember the first time I was able to contract, it was like an online subscription bookkeeping service. I was able to automate my book. It was incredible, and it was so helpful. I remember when I went from a shoebox of receipts to some software that I could just take a picture and then it would organize my receipts, keep them all in one place, and then I can just send them to my tax person that was preparing my taxes. So some of those things that you have to do that you cannot get around, if you can understand how to take advantage of the technology that's available out here to create some sort of system that is, I'm looking for the word that I want to use, that's automated. So that you can have more time for self-care or just rest, all those behind the scenes things that you have to do to keep your business operational.
Yeah, I think those are great points when you think about the idea of sometimes, when you think about burnout, right? You got to think about, whether there are things that you're doing that are leading you to burnout, or whether, again, being an entrepreneur is just not easy and never stops. And it's interesting you talk about this story about the 300 loaves of bread. I've seen, so many stories of entrepreneurs who, kind of what happens when the dog catches a bus, right? Then what? It's like you be careful what you wish for. Mm-hmm. I've been with companies that were trying to get on retail shelves and with national retail stores or whatever the case, and then you've been chasing this all this time, you've been pitching, and all of a sudden you get it, but people don't realize, well, now I got to fill that order, right? And I got to keep the order filled, and I also got to have the cash in order to make that work. I mean, these things are paid later. And so part of that, as you said, is thinking ahead, right? What happens if? So you think about putting those systems in, and, this idea of taking time to set aside to figure out what might be ways that I could, integrate things into my workflow that does release time and does make things easier for you. So, yeah, I think those are absolutely correct. But it's also understanding when you are feeling a certain kind of way and when you just need to exhale and take a moment, sometimes take a weekend, take an evening, do something that disconnects you from the stress and the and whatever you're dealing with when you're trying to start, grow, and build a business. But I also recognize, I want to be very straight up. Whenever your business is connected to your ability to eat, live, and survive, it's easy to say, hey, take a moment, exhale. Then it is say, hey, you know what, I got to keep grinding. But just try to find that balance.
Dr. Henry, are there any additional challenges that lead to burnout for entrepreneurs of color and/or historical marginalized entrepreneurs? And do you have any advice on how to navigate some of those challenges?
Well, I think one of the things that I've, and particularly having worked at a historically Black college, but also a predominantly white college, I've had a chance to kind of see differences in terms of how some people think through entrepreneurship. I say one of the things that I that probably falls into that category of identity and how self-perception plays is often this idea, of what people know to be as imposter syndrome, right? Where people have this sense that, I don't belong, or am I good enough, or how will people, accept me, and things of that nature. I remember I had a young man, a true story. He was a student of mine in my introductory entrepreneurship class. And in that class, I would have each student go through the semester, kind of building a business. What do you want to kind of bring to the world, product, service, et cetera, et cetera. And this young man, he had a side hobby of taking pictures. And so, he would talk about how he wanted to grow his business. He take pictures at weddings or events and things of that nature, portraits and all these things. And one day he asked me, he said, Dr. McKoy, can I talk to you after class? Right. I said, yeah, sure. So I didn't really know what he wanted to talk about. He said he wanted to talk about his business. And we were sitting there and he was kind of hoeing and humming around, and he was trying to, he seemed like he was kind of embarrassed about what he wanted to ask me. And he said, he finally said, well, how do you talk to white people? And it was really interesting because in his mind, he felt like, okay, well, I want to expand my business to be bound by, race or things of that nature. But he didn't have a whole lot of confidence as to kind of approaching, people outside of, his ethnicity was Black, and approaching them. And I think all those kind of things that come into play that we've talked about already, the sense of, okay, well, do I have to change my price for certain people to value me? Do I have to lower my price in order for people to give me a chance, and things of that nature? But again, I see a lot of the imposter syndrome aspect where people feel like that they might not belong. And part of that is the sense that somehow perhaps, the other entrepreneur over here is a lot smarter than I am, or has a lot more background than I have, or has more understanding of something than I have. And I try to, one thing I try to do is to really help students and individuals work through that. I say one of the best things that you can have to counter imposter syndrome is just do the work right. Really understand your craft. Really work your craft. The old saying about, you do something for 10,000 hours, you become an expert. And so don't leave any reason for anybody to, including yourself, to think that somehow you're not qualified to do this work.
Yeah, I'm thinking how my identity and self-perception play into burnout, in particular for people of color. I know for me, I think I was addicted to working hard. I've seen my mom, father, my grandparents, like they were hard workers, and I admire that quality. But sometimes I could have worked hard and a lot smarter. I could have had a bit more trust when people, especially white people or people that had been where I had been, to take some of their advice a little bit more seriously. I think I was so protective over, and I've seen this with entrepreneurs, your business is like your baby. It's something that came from you, from your hands, and you just protect it at all costs. And I think that race is a huge informant in who we decide to ask help from, who we decide to share about a need. Because, I had to grow in just kind of self-assurance. And I see the entrepreneurs that we work with that are like right there for scaling, and also are right at the edge of burnout. And what it takes for them is to be able to trust a little bit more, to get the help that they need so that they can rest and move forward.
Dr. Henry, Stephanie, thank you so much for your thoughtful conversation. I really appreciate your perspectives. But before we continue, let us take a moment to recognize our sponsor for this conversation, PNC Bank.
As a bank, PNC prides itself on being boring. But the truth is, they couldn't be more excited to serve the dynamic Triangle community. They've quietly toiled away to deliver brilliant results for their equally brilliant clients. And they have dedicated PNC teams throughout the local area, all ready to do the boring work to help you unlock your own brilliance. PNC Bank, brilliantly boring.
PNC Bank, National Association, member FDIC. Well, welcome back. What a great conversation we had about like burnout and how people can recognize it. You all were touching on a little bit was like this idea that people are in survival mode. And how do we make a shift or help entrepreneurs make a shift from that survival mode into feeling more sustainable?
Yeah, well, I think Stephanie hit some great points in the last segment in talking about some of the challenges that historically have weighed on communities and things of that nature related to, access to capital or the ability to feel like that the work that they're doing is being appreciated. Part of that, this idea of being able to let go of your business a bit in order to allow you to grow and expand. That could mean things like partnering with other folks, so that it's not everything is not on your own. It could mean something like merging with someone, right? Which I've seen so many times where entrepreneurs are doing some of the similar things or they're doing complementary things, and I think about the idea that, hey, you know what, y'all might do this better together. And I think it's also this notion of thinking about, somebody's got to do the operation, somebody's got to be out, selling, and somebody, and those kind of things that sometimes a division of labor. So I think that it's very important to think about the idea of making sure that you are becoming an expert at what you're doing, understanding how to navigate, getting advice, right? Even going to people, there's a lot of free services out there, and seek advice and get help on business plans or get help on other things. And I think the idea is a shift from this notion of I'm just always in grinding mode to, as Stephanie said earlier, about working kind of smarter, not harder.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. And I would add that when I was in survival mode, I realized that, and I didn't make this up. I forgot who shared this with me, but I had an aha moment. It was one of my mentors that when I had my business, they said, you're 90% of your time working in your business as a worker, and you need to spend more time working on your business as an owner. When I first heard that, that was a huge shift in my mindset from survival mode to sustainability mode. Because when I was working on my business, thinking about my business as an owner, the things that I was working on were those things that would make my business more sustainable, which would then make it more successful and profitable. But when I was working in my business, I was in a lot of survival mode.
Let's shift a moment and talk about sales. Last year, I led a few study groups on marketing, and one of the biggest challenges was helping people move away from the idea that sales is all about self-promotion or being pushy. Marketing can feel very uncomfortable, especially for new entrepreneurs. Dr. Henry, I would love to hear you and Stephanie discuss how entrepreneurs can see sales not as this self-promotion, but rather as an act of service, an opportunity to share something valuable that generally helps others.
So I have as I think about my history and the work that I've done and been fortunate to do, I think back to when I was in business school many years ago. I went to UNC Chapel Hill School of Business as an undergrad, and I remember back in the mid '90s, the early to mid '90s. This is date me a little bit. The sense was go out and print business cards up, right, and you go out and you you get into these network environments and somehow you hand out business cards and all this magic is supposed to happen, all these job opportunities and all these kind of things. And so, you kind of do what people are instructing you. But what I learned over time was that a much more effective way to make connections is to listen, right? I would go to chamber events or I would go to other events and I would actually meet people and would have a genuine interest in what their journey had been, maybe what their pain points were, all those kind of things. And so what happens when you go in listening, you start to hear about things that problems that people are trying to solve. And maybe, what you have is something that can help them solve that problem. If you go in first and you're selling hard, people can feel that. What I learned was that if I meet people and I'm asking them questions, and I'm somebody who I generally like people anyway, right? So I love to learn about people and their stories. And as you can tell from this, I love sharing mine. And so we go back and forth. And what I would often learn was that, maybe at that moment, there might not have been a sale or there may not have been this kind of professional, love connection. But, you may go back and then 6 months later, a year later, a couple of years later, something comes across. You say, hey, you know what? I know exactly who has this problem, who needs a solution. And you may reach out to that person. So I think this idea of going into a situation, thinking about how can you help somebody solve a problem? How can you understand what that problem is? How can you listen and understand that pain point? Creates a much different framework for selling than if you're just basically, I got a product or a service and I'm going to try to get you to buy this from me, regardless of what you need, because I need you to buy this from me.
I would agree. Like moving from not just making it about you, even though, it's you that's providing the product or the service, but really understanding your market and your client base. What do people want? And I was just sitting here trying to jot down whether what I'm about to say is true, and I think it's true that there are like maybe three things that entrepreneurs essentially do. They're either solving a problem or servicing or supplying a need or servicing or supplying a want, so kind of one of those three areas your business will fall under, and just kind of really understanding that and listening for that. Like, why does somebody want my consulting service or my construction service? They actually need something fixed, or why are they buying this muffin? This is a want. Like, what about it, makes them more joyful? So being able to really connect through listening and developing relationships with your clients in your market is key to that sales effort, and making it less about convincing someone and more about being a fit for whatever category they're falling into.
I also have to say that, the reality is that entrepreneurship is not easy. If it was, everybody would do it. And
Yes.
And the reality is, you're going to hear no's. You're going to hear a lot of no's. As the old saying goes, you try to move from no to no with great enthusiasm. You're going to make every sale, and you have to find a way to keep moving and keep believing in what you're doing, and that there's something that you're selling that actually has value, even if some people seemingly don't see that value.
So it sounds like this mindset shift from being self-promoting, pushy, to actually just like, hey, I have a product and service that's going to help your life, and this service-oriented approach. How do you think that this mindset is like connected to empowerment and equity in entrepreneurship?
Well, look, I taught on the entrepreneurial mindset. Really, I taught a lot of classes at North Carolina Central around entrepreneurship, everything from commercialization to inventions and new ideas to introductory entrepreneurship. My introductory entrepreneurship class was actually a requirement for all management students as well. So I had a full class all the time because those who were in management degree. I say that because all of those students didn't come into class wanting to be entrepreneurs, right? They came to class because they had to be in the class. And I would say, well, look, this is the truth of the matter. The reason why you need an entrepreneurial mindset is because whether you ever decide you're going to start a business or not, you live in an entrepreneurial world, and you are the CEO of your own company, which is, Me Inc., right? and you as an individual you're your own product, and you're competing with people beside you, people across the world. You got to figure out what your value is, kind of what you charge on the marketplace. You got to figure out, your research and development. How educated are you going to be? How much are you going to continue to fine tune yourself? Every once in a while, you're going to have a merger. You're going to marry somebody. Maybe have some spin off a couple of little additional, franchises or whatever.
I love this analogy.
I mean, it happened. Sometimes those mergers won't work, and you have to, but at the end of the day, you have to figure out how to compete and how to stay relevant in the marketplace. And so, whether you're talking about a business that you're starting, problem are you going to solve in this world? And so, I would always encourage students that again, whether you ever decide or think about starting a business or not, having an entrepreneurial mindset is going to be critical to your success in life. And more forward, because you got to figure out how to be adaptive and be, in a competitive space, and, how to market yourself, how, what is your brand? I mean, we all have a brand, what is your brand and those kind of things. So I think, it's crucial, because at the end of the day, it does give you some level of control over your destiny, right? And I think that's where, when you talk about the equity piece and things of that nature, you feel a certain amount of freedom about, bringing something into this world that you want to exist. And that is, your own skills and talent.
Yeah, and I would agree. And, I would say entrepreneurs are the builders of society. They're the builders of community. These are the architects of society. What I love about entrepreneurship, beautiful and diverse and creative and rich. And so the more entrepreneurs that we can support to go out into the world, I think the better.
Amen.
As we come to the close of our conversation, what's a final piece of advice you would give to the entrepreneurs listening, helping them honor their journey?
When I was teaching entrepreneurship, and when I talk to individuals now who are interested in entrepreneurship, I always say, there's some particular steps that you need to go through in order to be a successful entrepreneur. But I always say start with passion and purpose, right? Mm-hmm. What are you passionate about? What do you feel like you were put on this earth to do? And usually I say, the way you figure that out is think about what you would do with your life every single day if money wasn't an issue, right? How would you live your life? What would you get up and do? Entrepreneurship is not an easy journey. There's a whole lot of peaks and some even lower valleys sometimes. If you start with passion and purpose, then as you go through those valleys and those challenging times, that will carry you to the other side.
Well, Dr. McKoy, that's such wise counsel. All I can do is just yes, ditto that. I would love to just land and end with that, because that's perfectly said.
Yes, Dr. Henry. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and perspective with us today, and Stephanie, for all of your presence in this conversation and helping to remind us all that entrepreneurship isn't just about making money. It's about finding your value and bringing your gifts to the world to help others.
Thank you, Rennie. Thank you, Dr. McKoy. It was a pleasure.
Yeah, well, I really, really, really appreciate the opportunity to come and have this conversation with you all. I commend the work that you're doing, and which is so important. And I think that what hopefully the listeners take from this is that there's all kind of ways that we can contribute to society, and entrepreneurship is one of those ways that we can not only think about how do we help our individual trajectory, how do we help our family trajectory, but how do we help our overall community trajectory. And I think that having podcasts and conversations like this helps hopefully get more and more people to think about, how they can add value to this ecosystem. And it's certainly been a pleasure for me to engage you all. And I'm happy to come back anytime and chew the fat and, have a good time talking about entrepreneurship, hopefully empower others to think about their journey.
Wonderful, wonderful. We want to thank again PNC Bank for introducing us to you. And Rennie, if we don't have anything else, do we have anything else?
No, Stephanie, you can close us out.
All right. Well, as we like to say at the end of each podcast, our evolution begins with dialogue.
Thank you for listening to the Web Remedy Podcast, a mindset shifting project of Web Squared. Wealth Through Entrepreneurship for Black and Brown Businesses is a North Carolina nonprofit located in Chatham County. We offer incubator accelerator business services to Black and BIPOC entrepreneurs. Our podcast hosts are Stephanie Terry and Rennie Orr, the co-founders of Web Squared. We realize that building an ecosystem of support is critical to achieving our mission. Your donation to Web supports the podcast, Web's coaching services, and the promotion of the businesses and entrepreneurs we serve. To learn more about Web Squared, please visit our website at websquared.org.